So first of all, thank you guys for showing up today. We've started doing these events roughly once a month, and we're starting to get more and more people signing up for it. So excited for that. Excited to have you all here today. Today we're going to be covering workplace organization, specifically talking about a lean methodology of 5S. A lot of you guys have probably heard that term, or you might have 5S implemented at your facilities or your businesses. But we're gonna kind of pick it apart a little bit. Talk about what it is, where it came from, how it's used, how you would implement it, and then answer some questions at the end. So first, let's cover some misconceptions, right? The first most common thing that people associate with 5S is they say, well, it's just a housekeeping practice. And while that's technically true, it does promote good housekeeping. There's a lot more to it than that, right? It's really about efficiency, right? I mean, it came from the Toyota lean methodology, sort of. We'll talk about that here in a little bit, but it's one of the basic principles of lean, and one of the things you get from a well implemented 5S program is you actually get a cultural change to empower people to start thinking lean, right? When you enter a facility where things are, noticeably organized, right? Where you walk through it and everything has a place, everything's in its place. When you bring new hires on, when you bring clients on, when you have a team that's in that environment, it really does go a long way to encourage them to continue that best practice. The 5S's, some people call it 6S, and they incorporate safety, but for today we're going to focus on the 5S's. And what they are, in short, they stand for sort, set and order, shine, standardize, and sustain. So these are derived from the Japanese 5S's, and I'm going to butcher this, I'm sure, but in the lean methodology, Japanese terms are Sairai, Saiten, Saiso, Seketsu, and Shisoke. So we converted them to the English sort, set and order, shine, standardize, and sustain. When we unpack those words a little bit, we start to think about what that is, right? So when we talk about sort, we're talking about going to an area where activity is occurring, work is occurring, and you want to evaluate that orders or that area to say, what belongs here and what doesn't belong here. Let's sort those things out, right? It's pretty, it's intuitive. It makes sense. You shouldn't have a bunch of clutter in your workspace. But the purpose of sorting those things out is, it determines, do you have all the right things for the work area that you should have? And do you have too much? Are you bogging people down with excess, clutter and junk? When you don't have, obviously when you don't have all the things you need in your work area, you're going to find that, people from another work area are going to come in and borrow what you have. People from this work area are going to leave and borrow from other areas. And it's a major contributor to one of the 8 wastes, right? It's waiting. You're waiting to find the things you need. The next S is set and order. So once you know what you should have in the area, set it out, lay it out. Let's see, visually, lay it out, whether it be shadow boards or just resting on a bench somewhere. What would it look like to have everything that you need in arm's reach? What should go closest to the machine? What should go at overhead level? What should go down at ground level? Based on its usage and how frequently you're going to be, needing those tools throughout the day. Once you have that kind of laid out, the next process is to shine. Let's get it all cleaned up. Let's get the dirt and the grime and the oils off the floor and the chemicals off the surfaces, so that so this stuff is ready to go, and and it's not going to get dirty and grimy and gross. Then you want to standardize it, right? Once now you kind of know what you have, it's clean, it's organized. Standardization is where we might cut our shadow boards out, or our Kaizen foam, get things fitted, hang the pegboard with the outlines of your tools, or whatever's appropriate for the type of work that you do. I mean, in a manufacturing environment, obviously those shadow boards might be the best way. In an office environment, simply labeling where things go, or designating specific areas that are marked with signage, so on and so forth, might be a better fit. And then it comes down to sustaining. You want to audit this. You want to come back and review. Hey, we put all this energy into getting this set up. Is it being maintained? And that's kind of the 5 S's in a nutshell. When you want to start this implementation, if you decide to start implementing lean, it starts by picking the right team. So you want to pick people who are directly related to the process, but also people who may interact with that process, so you get perspective. Put together a small team. Take a snapshot of the conditions when you start. Let's see what does good, bad, or otherwise. Let's see what it looks like today, because you want to be able to show your successes at the end of this process, right? And where you came from, where you're going. Mock your layout, clean, and clean and organize your area. But use the input from that greater team to help decide, hey, Bob from the department next door is always coming over and borrowing this. He's going to have that perspective to help, help tell you, hey, you know what, maybe you guys need more of this or less of this, or maybe you need to take that out of the area because I'm using it, et cetera. Getting the team's buy-in, getting the team to promote this or be a part of this will help ensure that sustainability is easier to implement, right? I mean, when your team has a part or has a hand in getting it to a certain place, rather than just having management or some outside team come through and clean the slate and say, here's how you're going to do it, they're going to be more likely to take some pride in that, right? They had some opinions about it. They got to kind of shape it. And now when somebody comes in and starts, moving their cheese, so to speak, they're going to be like, hey, you know what? We put some energy in this. Let's keep this going. After you've walked your way through those 5 S's, and it's not a huge effort generally. I mean, it can be, but basically from an implementation can usually be done in a short amount of time. But after you've done that implementation, snap a picture of it so that you can talk about your success with your team. Say, hey, you know what? Here's where we were. Here's where we are now. And that picture will become part of your standardization, right? If you've got everything laid out, everything in your pick foam or your Kaizen foam, all your shadow boards set up, all your labels, and you take a picture of that, you post that at your workstation, that now becomes the standard for your daily, 5S maintenance or, end of shift cleanup or whatever the case may be, right? They can look at that picture and say, hey, at the end of my day, does my work area look like that picture now? If it does, great. If it doesn't, then they know they still have some work to do. A couple of weeks after you do your initial implementation, it's a good idea to come back and just audit, do that initial audit. Let's see what's still in place, what's not quite in place. And from that initial audit, you'll be able to say, hey, you know what, the shadow board stayed, or got kind of in disarray, but the labeling and where we set things up kind of stayed good. So what level of roles and authority do we need to implement to be able to sustain this, right? So if it's workstation related, it might be a matter of, hey, you're going to empower your workers to do a day-to-day clean. You're going to talk to them about the importance of it. But if it's getting cluttered more, and the workers aren't really taking the ownership of it, then maybe it's time to implement another layer, like a lead or a supervisor, to say, hey, you know what? Once a day, this single point of contact, you're going to take ownership of ensuring that it's being maintained and sustained, so that when we come back and audit, right, we can kind of understand where those failure points are occurring. And then routinely audit. Don't just rely on that single point to maintain it, but bring that team back together, that initial team, if possible, to come back and audit and say, hey, we were all part of this decision. We all know what went into it. Let's make sure that we are sustaining this. It's important to set goals related to those audits. So, determine how many audits per month or quarter or whatever makes sense for your organization to do, and track that as a 5S metric. In addition to how many audits you do, you should have some standards to say, hey, we want to have less than X number of findings in these audits, each month or quarter or however you set it up. Setting those standards will, or setting those metrics will, drive you to have a goal that you continually achieve, but it also sets you up to be able to continually improve, right? So once you realize, hey, I'm meeting these targets day in and day out or week after week or whatever the case is, you can say, hey, we're meeting it all the time. Let's maybe tighten up. Let's say, hey, instead of 3 findings per quarter, we want to knock that down to 2 because we know that our team is capable of meeting these expectations. And that continual improvement, will tighten up and make your lean process better, or your 5S process better. The outcomes of 5S, really, there's a couple of things you're going to gain from it. You're going to gain efficiency. Just some quick rough math, that I have laid out here is, if you've got a team of 25 people, for instance, and on average, 2 of those people spend 10 minutes a day looking for something, right? Maybe it's a wrench one day, it's a pen next day, it's a work instruction the day after that. But on average, 2 of those 25 are spending about 10 minutes a day. That comes out to about 86.5 labor hours lost for productivity every year. And that dollar value, if you're paying them $20 an hour, it's almost $2,000 in, it's $1,700 in lost production. So if you think about what the initial investment of putting that 5S in, implementing that process, you might spend a few hours on the initial. You might spend, an hour a week or an hour a month, depending on how much you audit. But that initial investment is going to be generally a lot less than what you're losing in productivity, and that's just the day-to-day looking for what you need. We all run across the thing where, hey, we have, I might have spent 10 minutes here and there looking for pens and papers and all these other things, but then a project comes back that you haven't worked on in a year or 2 years, and now you're spending half a day trying to find all those things that you had on that project the first go round, right? So to say 10 minutes is an average, usually you're going to have much more time than that. So the investment, the more time you save by having a good 5S, obviously, the better the investment is. We kind of touched on 5S being often called 6S and how it relates to safety. Some people incorporate that 6S as their safety metric, and they measure that. But a good 5S system actually promotes safety on its own. You don't have to add that extra S to have it be part of your safety program. The reason it does that, or the way it does that, is when we talk about the 5S's again, we talk about sort. When you sort out your workstations, and you put in there what belongs, and you take out what doesn't belong, in essence, you're removing hazards potentially. Nuts and bolts that might find their way on the floor that become a slipping hazard. They're not in the area, right? They've been removed. Chemicals, adhesives, things that might be irritants to the skin, or create fumes or whatever. If they're not needed for that process and they're not related to personal protective equipment that's being used in that area, and they're kind of weeded out, well, a lot of those hazards get taken away. Setting things in order, the second S, also means that if a PPE or some safety precaution is required for the task you're doing, well, then you've identified a place for it. It's been set in order, it's organized, and it exists where it's needed, when it's needed. So now if one of those chemicals that is a irritant does bother somebody or get on somebody's skin, the PPE or the safety stuff that they might need, the baking soda or whatever it may be to minimize that irritant, is right there in the workstation. So you're not letting somebody be exposed to that for an extended period of time when there might be a safety factor there. The shine portion of it, right? That's going to eliminate, that's going to keep things like oils and grease off the floor and clutter and things that people might slip on or trip on or whatever the case may be. It's going to keep that minimized. Standardizing, the fourth S, that adds consistency to your process. If you're doing the same thing every time, or the same thing the same way every day, then if a safety hazard does occur, in your process, if it's inherent in your process, it's going to be easier to identify and pinpoint when it's standardized. When there's no standardization, these things might occur, but they're harder to say, hey, you know what, the process is driving this safety factor. And then lastly, sustain generates that culture, that mindset of continuing this activity and keeping people's mindsets focused on sustainability and ensuring that those first four S's that are directly related to safety continue to roll out, continue to be effective. So in a nutshell, I mean, you're not only going to gain efficiency, but you're going to gain safety. And the last thing, the last benefit from it is, and this is a pretty obvious one, is it's marketability, right? When you've got a workstation or a shop floor or an office or whatever your work area may be, that is well organized and apparently organized, right? When you walk into it, you can see at a glance, hey, this place is, they've got everything that they need. They've got the resources laid out, and it makes sense. That's the kind of place that you can either take pictures of and put on your website. And I'm sure everybody's probably been at a company or seen a company website where you click on it and there's lots of pictures, like professional looking pictures of a factory or of a office, but then you go and visit the place and you're like, well, those pictures on the website aren't this place, right? This place doesn't look anything like that. Well, of course, you're not going to put a picture of a cluttered office on your website. But if you could put actual pictures of what you do day to day on your website or out there in the public to see, and it really represents what what it looks like under the hood, your customers are going to be like, hey, you know what? That I've been there. I've seen that, right? Or that looks like a real place. They look like they have their stuff together. And of course, walking customers in, we've all done the mad scramble, right? Oh, big customer audits coming up in a couple of days. Quick, everybody clean, right? Well, if you have a system that's sustained, that is focused on 5S, and this workplace organization, you don't have to do those surge cleans because, quite frankly, I mean, you've got better things to do probably in your day-to-day than stress about a customer coming on, right? Or coming on site. If you have a process in place that's effective, that is consistently being used, then you're kind of always ready for that customer to come on site. You shouldn't have to, do that mad dash at the end. Now, lastly, we're going to talk about, why we think this works, right? I mean, why is 5S kind of a go-to? Well, in the 1970s, Toyota came out with, Lean, and it was officially rolled out as 5S being one of its Lean fundamentals that was used by Toyota Motor Company. And they were, they've got a bunch of different Lean principles. But Lean actually goes back a lot further than that. So, Lean's been, in one form or another, has been being used since the 16th century. Back in, in the early shipbuilder days of, the Venetian shipbuilders, they used to take them weeks to build ships a traditional way. Well, they developed a process that mirrors Lean, that actually was, or that mirrors 5S, that actually allowed them to organize their workstation and to bring the shipbuilding process from several weeks down to hours. They were actually able to complete ships, not battleships, not massive ships, but they were able to build ships in a matter of hours. And at this scale, they were the earliest large-scale industrial enterprises prior to the Industrial Revolution, which didn't occur for another 200 years. So, and really, it all came down from the way that they had organized their workstation and knew what they had what they needed, where they needed, when they needed, so that they could be as efficient as possible, to really build up this enterprise, that had never been seen before. And because of it, the way it's been adopted and the way it's been married with other lean techniques and other best practices over time, we've done a lot to refine that. And those principles, they're tried and true. They really can help a company out. So at this point, we got through it a little bit faster than the 30 minutes I had planned, but I'd like to open this up to questions and answers or feedback from lean experiences that you guys might have that involve 5S. So if anybody has anything they want to add or ask, open opportunity. See somebody popped in with a chat. Oh, somebody's speaker cords severed, so I didn't see that one. All right. Thank you guys. If nobody has anything, definitely thank you guys for joining. We're going to keep doing these, once a month, and try and get as many people, engaged in some of these concepts that maybe they don't use on a day-to-day. And hopefully we'll start to get some more feedback from you guys about topics that you'd like covered. So if there is a lean or quality systems topic that you'd like to discuss, throw it in the comments, shoot me an email, and we will consider all that stuff when we set up our next events. All right, well, thank you very much, guys. Have a great rest of your Friday.